Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror film from Argentina, Spanish language, English subs, released in the year 2017, directed by Damian Rugna, and this film is called Terrified. So Terrified is set in a neighbourhood in Buenos Aires. There is a man that has been arrested for the supposed murder of his wife. It was a brutal murder, and now he's been held in custody. But these paranormal investigators believe that there is more to this story than first meets the eye, because they've had similar stories happen in the past where it actually has something of a higher entity involved. So they believe that this might be one of these cases. So they go to the police station, they interview this guy, and there's sufficient evidence to suggest that they're onto something. So they go to this neighbourhood, they go inside this guy's house, and they start to document the ongoings throughout the evening. But to their surprise, they realise that this is much bigger than they first thought, because the whole neighbourhood could be haunted. And in fact, by the time they realise how powerful this entity is, it might already be too late. So whether or not it is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Terrified. I was actually very excited to see this movie. Now you guys know how important Argentina is in my life, and so whenever I come across an Argentinian movie, especially horror, I just have to watch it. Now the only issues I have with Argentinian horror and South American horror in general is that the gap between the good movies and the bad movies is actually quite wide, and I'd like to see that gap narrow, but you know, there are really good ones but really bad ones, and so it's like a lottery, and a lottery can be quite exciting, is because are you going to get a movie you'll never forget, or are you going to get a movie you wish you could forget? And so that's a criticism I have of Argentinian horror, but when they get it right, they really get it right. And another reason why I was excited to see this movie is that it has a lot of hype. Now I know better than to judge a film based on hype, but Argentinian horror films don't really get a lot of hype on a worldwide stage, and so Terrified is one of those movies that got a lot of recognition. It actually won some awards, and so I thought, alright, well that is another reason to watch this movie. So I had my fingers crossed, I saw the trailer, I thought to myself, this looks like a paranormal sort of The Conjuring type of movie, but I was hoping that it was going to provide something a little bit more. And after watching the film, I will say that this movie has negatives. It's not a perfect horror film, it's far from a perfect horror film, but the things that this movie does right, it does very well. And what this movie does very well is it creates genuine scares. Now this is something of a forgotten art. You know, horror movies is an avenue for the directors to be very lazy, and lazy scares are jump scares. Jump scares are cattle prod horror, basically not creeping you out through your senses, but creeping you out and basically shocking you as opposed to creeping you out. So jabbing you with a cattle prod so you jump, and that's compensating for a scare, and that's what a scare is these days, and that's very easy to create. Just create a loud bang, and there's a lot of these movies that dictate when you should be feeling scared, and so it's kind of insulting the audience's intelligence. But Damian Rugna in Terrified does a great job at giving you a very mature sort of paranormal film, in that it's not dictating when you should be feeling scared. It's not basically allowing you to brace for impact. Now what I mean by that is when you cue a soundtrack to indicate a scary moment's coming, you can brace for that impact. But Terrified never allows you to do that, is because you have to pay attention to what's going on to genuinely feel the scares. Is that there are moments where you catch a glimpse out of the corner of your eye and you think to yourself, did I just see what I just saw? And that really creeps you out. It's very subtle scares, but those subtle scares equal to so much more than just a lazy jump scare. And so there are set pieces in this movie that were absolutely phenomenal. I thought as though they were genuinely scary, and this is a forgotten art, and this is by far the best part of Terrified, is that there are set pieces that I thought were expertly handled. It took me back to the days where I felt genuinely scared as a child watching horror movies, and because it relies on the competency of a director in this genre. It's not something of a lazy avenue. This is a movie that does have a very strong template as far as scaring an audience, and that is down through the visuals and the way that the camera is used. And so it doesn't have cheap tricks as far as cueing the sound in order to let the viewer know when they should be feeling scared. This is allowing the viewer to use their own minds up as to whether or not they should feel scared, and it really does emphasize the power of the scare, and it's really putting this director's neck out on the chopping block, is that if you don't feel scared at a particular moment where the director's trying to make you feel scared, then it's going to fail. And that takes a lot of guts, it takes a lot of courage. And so, as I said, if you cue the scary music, okay, you're going to be scared, you know what's going to be around the corner, and although it'll hit you and it'll scare you, it scares you because of the cattle prod, and because that needs the cattle prod, because there is no sense of, okay, what is around the corner, because we're kind of bracing ourselves, and so it needs the cattle prod horror. because you're not really feeling as though you're genuinely creeped out because you know what's coming. And so Terrified never allows you that safety net, and that's why I thought it was scary. It was a very brutal film, but it doesn't rely on its brutality. It just relies on freaking an audience out through the usage of the camera combined with the visuals. I thought the way that these entities looked was fantastic. It's just a really sort of old-fashioned horror film that allows you to really seep into the atmosphere and just feel all of its glory as these horrible things are happening. So I thought that was fantastic. Cinematography is excellent. The production value is very impressive in this film. So it is a lot of time has been put into this movie, and I thought as though it worked fairly well. The runtime is very brisk, so you don't really get sidetracked too much by boring material. And there are the scares are thick and fast, but they're not so thick and fast that you become desensitized to them, which is my biggest criticism of The Conjuring 2. Now, this is a film that reminded me of The Conjuring 2, is that there are scares that happen quite regularly, but in The Conjuring 2 it was happening so regularly that you become desensitized to it, whereas in this movie the scares have a little bit more time between them, and so it allows you to kind of get that sense of anticipation. Okay, something bad is starting to cook up again, but because it's not cueing the music, where is this bad thing going to happen? But The Conjuring, because it was so scare, I thought to myself, all right, well, it's kind of using it to an excessive level. And this movie threatens to use it to an excessive level, but it doesn't quite do it to a point where I felt as though, okay, I'm not really that scared anymore. So it does create a very consistent tone as far as scaring an audience is concerned in the horror genre. Unfortunately, however, there are issues that I have with this movie. Now, the biggest issue is that the story and the characters play second fiddle to the horror set pieces. This is basically a demonstration in how to scare an audience, but unfortunately, that's compensating the fact that the characters were very weak, the story was quite weak, and it was actually a little bit disjointed in the way that it told its story. And so I thought that was the biggest criticism, is that, okay, it does scare you, it does genuinely creep you out, makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, but unfortunately, as far as character development is concerned, I didn't get to know these characters very well, so when bad things were happening, I didn't really care about them. It was more a case of being in a haunted horror attraction, in that you want to get scared yourself as the viewer. You're not really scared for them. And so the story and the characters, it just didn't have a depth. It actually felt very superficial in that regard, and so that's the reason why I just didn't feel as though I connected to the story, I connected to the characters. I was just going through this horror attraction, and I was just getting scared as to me on a personal sense, as opposed to actually genuinely caring about the story. So I just thought as though more time and attention needed to be put on those moments with the characters and the story, and it would have been an overall very rewarding experience. But pushing that aside, it's still very impressive in what it does. It knows how to scare an audience. There are some moments that are incredibly memorable. As I said, there are moments that are very, very brutal, but it relies on the psychology of being genuinely freaked out, and I think Damien Rugner really ticked a lot of boxes in the right areas. And so if you are a fan of the paranormal type of movies and you want something that is going to actually showcase genuine scares in a very competent level, then Terrified is definitely for you. It showcases how good Argentinian horror and South American horror can be in general. So hopefully after watching this movie, it makes you want to go out there and track more films from this region of the world. So overall, for Terrified, going to give this one 3.5 stars. I was really impressed. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.